Welcome to Cornerstone's Pastors Podcast. This is Pastor Scott, and with me, as usual, are Pastors Brian and Matt.
Hey, everybody!
Oh, that was
What
so
you
good.
might not know
That was so good.
is that in an earlier recording that was lost to a computer crash, Scott said our energy was low.
Not anymore, Scotty.
I said with me, Pastors Brian and Matt. You're like, hey. That was much better, guys. Much better.
I
The
think we might.
difference was that in Eeyore. I feel like we were in the middle somewhere.
I think we should do it a third time. Imagine how much more excited we would be the third time.
So good. Today we're going to talk about community, the enjoyment, the joy of having relationships with one another, and particularly, actually, we're going to talk about community groups, because a lot has changed in the midst of this coronavirus quarantine. Obviously, most significantly, I think maybe most obviously, our Sunday services have changed, and we're trying to navigate worshiping together on Sundays in a different format. But another one of the actually really significant and potentially even most significant changes for a lot of us in the ways that we interact as a church family is that the way we engage in community groups has changed. We not only can we not meet together as a whole family, but we can't even meet together in the smaller iterations of that family as community groups. And so that brings up all sorts of different factors and challenges and pain points and opportunities. And so we thought it'd be helpful to talk about those today. And so, but before we jump into talking about what that looks like in the midst of this season, I thought it might be helpful to just take a step back and be reminded of why we structure our church family this way in the first place. Why we have community groups, why community groups are, as we say over and over, the heartbeat of our church. So, Matt, why do we have community groups? Why do we do church this way?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think actually it's something that we should ask ourselves a lot. Why do we do the things that we do, and make sure that we have good biblical answers for it? Because the Bible doesn't specifically say that churches need to have community groups. There's no specific command that says you need to meet in small groups of people once a week or however often, and so that's not something that is specifically commanded. But what is commanded in the New Testament with regard to what the church is supposed to be is that we're supposed to be a place where we are living in community with one another. And there's a series of commands throughout the New Testament. There's almost 60 of them, of these commands that are one another commands. Love one another, serve one another, lay down your life for one another, bear one another's burdens, that in reality are very difficult to practically live out amongst the entirety of a church body, even if it's just a few hundred people, even if it's just 50 people. It's hard to obey the command, bear one another's burdens with 50 other people, right? And so there's a sense in which the practical reality necessitates that you kind of say, how do I live this out? I'm called to live out these one another's as a follower of Christ. I'm called to live this out with brothers and sisters in Christ. What does that look like? For us, community groups are a way that we help facilitate the kind of church that God has called us to be and the commands that he's given us as the church in those one another's.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. So, and as we've talked about community groups over the years, and maybe over the last number of years, we've used a definition of community groups. I didn't even prep you guys for this. Can you guys remember what our definition of community groups are?
A small group of people who live life together as a family, discipling one another and reaching out together.
Dude,
is that right?
Wow.
Nice pull. Nailed it. That is exactly it.
And if you've seen our community group primer, Brian repeats that over and over again in the
looking
community group primer.
Slightly off camera.
Yeah.
The entire time.
Yeah, and very young and very handsome.
There's a vibrancy I had.
There's
once.
a vibrancy. Yeah, that's the word I would use. He was vibrant. Less vibrancy now. A lot less vibrancy now.
I don't think so.
No.
I think Brian's sufficiently vibrant.
Yeah, he's about appropriately vibrant.
A good, normal amount of vibrancy.
Can I have just an aside? You get an aside once every 5 weeks, I think. And so you have an aside. I just have an aside. I just think Brian's very vibrant. By the way, I wanted to share with everybody that Martin Luther said, if there's no laughter in heaven, then I don't want to go. So just as a heads up. That's why we laugh.
That's why we're doing this.
That's why we laugh?
Yeah,
That's why we
laugh. That's why we laugh.
Is there anything in there about bad jokes?
I've never said one, so I'm not sure. Unfamiliar.
Martin Luther wrote a lot of stuff, so hard to say.
So a community group
What were we
is
talking
a
about?
small group of people,
Yeah.
small group of believers
Who commit to
who
living
commit
life
to
together.
living life together, disciple one another, and reaching out together, right? So which it's the context where, as Matt said, we live out the commands of Scripture to care for one another, to come alongside one another, exhort one another, serve one another. And over the years, we found the most helpful, one significantly helpful tool in facilitating those relationships is an identified group of people that meet together once a week, every other week, to talk. Sometimes they go through the sermon. Sometimes they do a study together, to pray together, live like. It's kind of like a family meal, right? Like their relationships extend beyond that meeting time, but that meeting time helps to facilitate the relationship. It's something you can always count on, right? It's an opportunity to connect, to see one another. But in this time, in this season, that's something that's been taken away from us, right? Like and actually that's maybe not the way I want to put it, right? That's something that, given the nature of the world right now, it's not wise or loving for us to do that, right? To gather in that same way. And so most community groups have gone virtual, similar to our worship service, right? They're meeting on Zoom or Google Meet or whatever their favorite platform is. This is obviously a really different time, but as the community groups have done that, maybe either with your community groups, the community groups that you oversee, like how have you seen groups cope with, or maybe even thrive during this crisis? How has it affected them, and yeah, what's going on with that?
I mean, I've seen a lot of people go virtual. That's to keep the meeting in a sense, but do it on one of those platforms. There's a lot of text messaging and kind of a variety of trying to make up for the difficulty or the lack of connection and the disrupted kind of normalcy of every night on this, every weeknight a week we come and see each other this way. So now can we make up for that? And so I found a lot of kind of scrambling to be like, do we bring back the phone call? How do we try and replicate some of that connection? And even one of the groups that I oversee, they watch the service together virtually. So like over Zoom, they have like a hangout where they can kind of they know they're watching it all together. So there's just all these different ways that the technology has helped, but also just some intentionality that I've seen.
Yeah.
What have you seen, Scotty?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of things similar to that. One of the things that's interesting in that and in going virtual is for a number of the groups that I've seen with families that are made up of families, that's essentially moved the group meeting time to an adult time. Not really like having kind of Zoom calls with bunches of kids all at the same time is kind of just
it's not ideal.
No, it's a recipe for chaos. But especially if you don't have a very like specific purpose, right? If they're just kind of there to hang out. And so one of the dynamics that I think has switched is that there's been a lot of movement towards community groups that were, in that sense, multi-generational, in a way have become more specifically for the adults, which I think is appropriate and makes sense. But I think it's left some people wondering about how to connect their kids, how to keep their kids connected to one another, how they're to help facilitate those relationships as well. And I think, I mean, when I think about that, I think that there's a real, I guess, number one, I'd say, the group Zoom is probably not the best way to keep your kids connected to each other.
Kids are terrible at Zoom.
Yeah, those of you who are teachers and are doing that daily with multiple children,
goodness.
we just our hearts go out.
They're so thankful for you.
Like they don't like. There's something that about the social interaction, like the not making noise and all the other things. They just don't understand. It's not ideal. Maybe older kids, maybe
Well,
like teenagers.
Well,
or-
and yeah, I mean, and our life groups are like our life groups or middle school and high school
Yeah.
groups are able to do that, kind of. Krista says kind of, but so I mean, I think when you're trying to keep the kids connected, I think interpersonal opportunities are far more helpful, even if it's video chats between like two individual kids, between three. One of the things my like younger kids have been doing is like playing. I mean, it's actually kind of sad, but they've been like playing with their friends. They like set up an iPad or a computer like on a FaceTime call or something like that. And then like I play with dolls here and you play with dolls there. And we just like hang out with the thing running. Like
There's
like,
a wistfulness to that. It's like
it's the weirdest, saddest, but
This is
like,
the
okay,
worst. This is the worst.
it really is. It really is.
What,
But
do any of your kids do Marco Polo?
so that's become a new thing. Yeah.
yeah.
For us.
Like you can like do video messages to other friends and stuff. That's
Which-
kind of cool too.
Which works really well. But before I
TikTok, Razzmatazz, anything else?
but
Is
before
razzmatazz a thing?
No, I don't think so. I didn't know that.
before I give the recommendation, just out, I actually have questions about the security of Marco Polo, but that's for another. I just have unanswered questions.
Well, yeah.
But which I think we have to be careful with all those. But I think all of these are different opportunities, right? Like recorded messages, things like that can be super, super helpful, like great opportunities, just ways to help connect kids. And in that same way, I guess I would say it's actually highlights the fact that community groups aren't all about the group meeting, right? They've never been about the group meeting. Like the whole point was never about like have a group meeting and then that's it, right? They're about the relationships. And so the question then is, what's the most helpful way in this season to facilitate these relationships? And if the most helpful way among the adults is to do a group meeting, great. If a group meeting isn't actually particularly helpful, even for the adults, then maybe we should shift to doing other things. I mean, to me, it lends to, I would encourage community groups and even community group leaders to have that conversation together right now, to stop and ask, okay, what is the format that helps us engage relationally, even if it's in a limited way during this time, instead of trying to like force what it used to look like into a new paradigm, like just asking like what's actually most helpful for us.
Absolutely. I think that's a really good point. We tend to use the word community group sometimes to describe the event of gathering together and meeting together for a group, similar actually to the way we use the word church. It's kind of interesting. There's parallels there. When the reality, like you said, Scotty, is the formal night where you gather all together is not in and everything of what the group is. It's an important component that we've lost or that we can't do in this time.
Yeah.
But those relationships are so key. And so I think that flexibility and creativity of maybe it's smaller groups, maybe it's just the guys, maybe it's just the ladies, maybe it's just prayer groups, or maybe it's just texting, checking in with people is really, really, or any of the other ideas. I love the idea of Zoom watching the service together.
Yeah.
That's cool. I think there's ways that we can still maintain and facilitate those relationships, and this is kind of a time for us to put that in our minds, to say it's not about the meeting or the event, it's about the relationship.
Yeah, I mean, I had somebody just recently ask me, like, as they're thinking about their community group, and they're like, is it better just to like try to do business as usual, or to like just use the time to catch up or whatever? And I guess I would almost like steer away from anything that feels like business as usual, because there's nothing usual about this. So like, what I think the question then is like, what's actually most helpful? What's most needed? Now, if what's most helpful for your group is like, hey, we've, for 3 years, every week we've discussed the sermon, and that would be really helpful for people. That'd be really encouraging for people to discuss the sermon. Well, then awesome. Then continue to do that. Like, then find the best way to do that. For other groups, I know for our group, one of the things we've found is, at least right now, and this could change as this, the season continues, but right now, like, it seems like the most encouraging, helpful thing is to get together as men and women all together, but also just to talk about life and pray for each other and catch up and and encourage one another and exhort one another in a much less structured way, just as it's taken form this season. And so I think in that way, community groups and community group leaders ought to feel that freedom to, I don't know, not maintain a program just for a program's sake, but to try to figure out what is most helpful for the people here.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that's going to be important to recognize is how much intentionality is going to be required, more than normal for everyone in the group, to maintain the relationships. So on the one hand, the main reason we have community groups is because of what we said earlier, that it's basically us trying to just lower the obstacles as much as we can to living out what it's like to do what God asks us to do as a church. On the other hand, it's uniquely fitting for our kind of context, for our moment in time, for our place in an urban center. Like we are all bad at friendship in a lot of ways. Like we're bad at relating at a deep level with other people, not because we're bad people necessarily, but like just our moment in time has not allowed us to develop certain skills that in a different time, in a different place, like those were baked into the society. They were baked into how you grew up. Like people move to LA, they're very lonely. Like just because you're Christian doesn't change that. And so community groups is a way of also addressing the unique needs that we have in our city, in our time, in our place. And so to have those needs then disrupted this way means that now we have a bunch of people like myself, as you guys know, who are not like prone. I need the structures to help deliver me to that kind of community. Like that's usually how I function. I have these structures in my life that deliver me to it in a way that I don't either, like I'm not very good at, or it just feels like a lot of friction or obstacles to get there on my own. Those, I've leaned on those really heavily, and those have been removed for us. And so for anyone now who's in a community group, we're now in a situation where we're kind of like, there's something we're not that great at. Some of you are great at it, but a lot of us aren't. And we're being asked to kind of figure out on our own how to do it without the normal structures that have delivered it to us or delivered us to it. And so I think it's helpful to just recognize that in the midst of a disrupted schedule, and I know it's been like a lot of weeks, but it still feels disrupted. It still feels mentally taxing and kind of emotionally taxing. The energy levels aren't where they are. To then be told, hey, you really should try and do this other thing as well, is going to be you're going to feel more prone to not show up to a virtual thing. Maybe some of you are going to show up because you love it. I have to. Others of us are going to go, maybe I'll come to that thing because the structure is still there, but it's not what it was. There aren't side conversations that are happening when I'm there that night, whatever. And it just feels like one more thing to do that I don't have the energy to do, to even just to text someone something. And I think it's a similar thing to other things we talked about in this podcast, where we're going to have to put in 5% more effort in a time we don't feel like we have any percentages left over. But that's actually going to deliver us a lot of things that are very central to being human. It's going to deliver us connection and, in some senses, actual rest that comes through relationships by picking up a phone, by attending these virtual things, by getting creative and intentional. But I just think it's helpful for all of us, myself included, to recognize we have to be a little extra intentional during this season to get something that we're used to being kind of delivered to us through our structures.
Yeah, I think it's so helpful. And I mean, it really like answers, it gets at, my next question was just like, why is the structure so important, right? Particularly for us right now.
I do read your questions.
No,
I promise I
do.
No. I do.
No, but I think it's the perfect transition, because I think this is what we really need to talk about, right? Because, and when we say this is why this structure is most important, as we've said, and I think we just need to repeat it over and over again. We mean more than just the meeting time. Like by the structure, and the reason the structure is important, we mean the identification of these other people. Like as a church family, the people in your community group are the ones who God has placed you in their lives to be the ones who can speak truth to them and can care for them and can serve them and pursue them during this season, right? Like this is God's. We believe God's orchestrated and structured things such that He puts people in your life for a reason, and the people in your community group are I absolutely believe are the ones He desires for you to pursue. So not just, and it's going to take 5%. It might take 20% more effort to reach out, to send a text, to think about somebody or check in. And that can't be left like purely on the shoulders of pastors. We only have 10, and that's nowhere near enough for that capacity, especially in the midst of this. But that also isn't just purely on the shoulders of your community group leaders. Like your community group leaders are meant to help facilitate this and to hopefully set an example in that. But this is for all of us, right? This is a call for all of us to engage with one another. And when we ask, okay, well, who should I call? Like, who should I be reaching out to? Like those in your community group, I think are at the very least that first step within the body of Christ.
And I would say, you mentioned this earlier, Scotty, but there's something about in this season really focusing on just like caring for one another. I mean, this isn't going to be a season of like probably intense study. It might be for you, and if it is, praise the Lord for that. But this is probably not going to be for most people a season of intense study or season of of intense learning in different ways, or a season of like growing in the ways we normally think of it. If you just think of yourself as someone who's there to care for other people, like, how can I pray for you? I think that's the question I would ask more often than not. How can I pray for you? And pray with them. Pray for the people that you're talking about. Pray with them. Pray for them. What other kinds of things might you need? Is everything okay? Are you doing okay? Check in with people, because there's a lot of ways that I think our minds are kind of maybe having kind of expectations about what community should be. You mentioned like the idea of keeping things as normal as possible, but not in this season. This isn't a normal season. This is a season where we need to really especially be caring for one another. And that's what that is. It's more than just, or it's less than just having these expectations about perfect community, and more about how do you look around and say, who are the 3-4 people in my community group I can really just care for and pray for in this time?
Yeah. I especially appreciate just that emphasis on prayer, because I think that this provides an incredible opportunity, both individually and as groups, to dig into prayer, to make sure that you're like, oh my gosh, there's so many things I can't do for these people. Like, I'm so limited, but there's no limitation to that. And that's, I mean, it can sound a little cliche, but prayer is the greatest tool God's given us to effect change in the lives of those in our community, of those around us. And there's no limitation on that. That's not hindered at all. In fact, maybe even with the kind of upending of certain things that may even be helped. I was just talking to somebody earlier about how, and she was saying how their group, their community group, has been praying significantly more and praying more together than they ever have before in this season. And part of it, actually, I really love this example. She said, and part of it is because we're also not just like saving prayer for the end. We're not just like closing in prayer. Like, basically, people are sharing about their lives and about things going on, and like as soon as somebody's done sharing, like somebody's like, okay, let's pray for that, right? And they're praying right then, and they'll pray, and then they'll share, and then they'll pray, and then they'll share, and prayer becomes a much more kind of just natural part of the warp and woof, Brian, of daily life in their communities. The regular, such a regular part of their relationships together. And sometimes because we don't know what else to do, right? We don't know,
or we can't.
Yeah,
we don't have the option to do anything.
Exactly. So if community is so important, and if community groups, particularly in our local church context, are so important, what about those that maybe they're listening, they're a part of our church, but they aren't yet involved in a community group, right? They don't have a community group that they would call theirs, whether they attend or not. It's like, is this a good time to try to get connected with one? Like, should they just wait? Like, what would you say to somebody who's not connected?
Yeah, it's interesting. So in a normal world, we typically have someone come to our intro classes so that we can get to know you a little bit, and you can get to know us a little bit before we connect you to a community group. But things aren't normal, and so we would love to. If you're out there listening and you're feeling disconnected from people, or you're feeling like you are alone, or you're really struggling in that way and you want to be connected to people, we would love to connect you. I think it's a great opportunity, a great time. You know, it's not ideal because you don't get to see people face to face, but I absolutely think we would love, or absolutely think you should, and we would love to help you get connected. And you can email me directly, which is matt@cornerstonewla.org, or info@cornerstonewla.org, and we will help you get connected, find a group that could connect. There's actually people that we have connected to community groups that wouldn't normally be able to make it to that community group because of when it meets typically, but now because of this, they're able to. So it's kind of an interesting opportunity. We don't want you to be alone in this time.
Yeah. I mean, and that's where I think actually this season does provide not only challenges, but also unique opportunities. I think, unique opportunities for lots of people who maybe either couldn't or hadn't prioritized it. And now are like, wait, like, no, that I recognize it. Like that is really, really important. Because of that dynamic, I've talked to a couple of different people who there's new people in their community groups, but they've only ever met virtually, right? They haven't actually. So, I mean, in situations like that, and as we like, I mean, do you have any type of like encouragement or even just suggestion for groups as they welcome people in that they've only ever met virtually, and how to love them well, how to care for them?
So I would say anytime anyone goes to a new group, there's a certain awkwardness anyways, right? That you can't avoid, and it's made even harder over virtual things. Yeah. I think probably one of the easiest things, either a leader or maybe not a formal leader in the group, but someone who's, a mature person could probably connect with that person in like a more one-on-one way as well. But also just let them tell their story. Mm-hmm. We had a new couple in our group, and we just got to hear more of their story and just said, hey, tell us more about yourself. It was their first time coming to our virtual community group at all. And I've met them in person, but they've never come to the group meeting time before. And just, we got to learn about them, got to learn more about who they are, their story. And it was great to just hear and get to learn more about them and pray for them in this time. So there's awkwardness. Don't push it. Don't try to, be best friends with them right away, right? Community also takes time in real life and rather than just virtually. So it's going to take time virtually as well. But allow the space for them to share and allow the space for them to get to know everybody else as well.
Yeah, I think it's really good. And I think, it is good to recognize that these things are difficult in person. And actually, I think one of the things that's really interesting is that there's almost, I don't know, you go either way on it, but I think that there's almost a lower barrier to entry to jump on a Zoom call from your house than there is to show up at somebody's house you've never been to, and meet with a big group of people. And so I hope actually the Lord uses that in some powerful ways to knit relationships together, to build relationships, to build community through this, to expand community and to strengthen community through this. It makes me, I had a second point and it's gone. It's totally gone.
It was really good too.
It was about
community groups
showing up. It was definitely about community groups. It was about showing up and
new people
and anyways,
going to someone's house and the difficulty of that. And what if they have weird rules in their house? You don't have to worry about that over a Zoom call.
All right, so I'll jump in here.
Brian, you're so vibrant.
It's just the vibrancy that's making it work.
Jump in.
One thing that might be worth considering is that, especially if you have a group that is doing a lot of that kind of, we're just kind of sharing what's going on right now. This is a pretty unique time to be able to invite non-believing friends and coworkers to something like this. I mean, I think you will never get them probably saying, hey, I wish I had a virtual group that I could share what's going on in my life right now. But the idea of being able to know that people have nothing to do, give or take, in terms of their nights, and that this is a time when we're all kind of reeling and looking around and going, wow, things are really different, and how nice it is to be able to process that, to be able to basically, there's a low barrier to entry right now and saying, hey, yeah, we just sit around and talk about what has been going on this week and how we're thinking about it. And it's a church group, which might make some people skittish, but Like I think it's worth giving that a shot with people in your life who maybe have no one to talk to in a city like this where community groups are so important to provide those structures to have those relationships. What if someone that you know is just alone? Well, you can reach out to them, but it would be interesting if they might find it, helpful to be a part of something larger where we're all just kind of sharing what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where I think we can think through how this helps us to go back to the definition, how this helps us to disciple one another and reach out together, right, in a new way and in a new format. And to the extent that you're just trying to survive and get by, then like that's okay. But to the extent that you have the capacity to look around and see, okay, what opportunities are there here to serve others, to care for them in the midst of this, to open the door to true hope. We should be utilizing these relationships in however we can to bring that about. And which actually brings me back to what I forgot.
There it is.
I remember. Wait. The reason I forgot it was because it was simply to make the point that we keep coming back to the same point, which is it's about the relationships, right? It's about community groups are about the relationships, not about the meeting, the gathering, a certain structure, right? A certain night. Like the night, the structure, the group, the meeting are all meant to help lower barriers to the relationships. And so the question now is, what are the structures that help you lower the barrier to relationships with one another and potentially with the non-believers in your life as well, right? And so we ought to use our meeting times or the technologies available to us or the opportunities, however we can, to best facilitate that, right? Whether it's, text strings, whether it's Marco Polo, whether it's Zoom calls, whether it's phone calls, right? That's the question we ultimately want to be asking. And we also recognize that some of you don't feel like you even have capacity to ask those questions right now. Then great. Like let somebody else suggest something and go along with it for right now. But those are the ultimately the questions that we ought to be asked, that I think this season gives us the opportunity to ask.
And for those of you who are like so exhausted and so overwhelmed and so just struggling in this time, I want to encourage you to, at the very least, if you feel like you can't participate in any of the things that your community group's doing, at the very least, please allow people to pray for you. Please allow people to know what's going on so that they can pray for you. Even if it's just an email or text message, there are people around you that love you and care for you. And it's exhausting for everybody, and it might be especially exhausting for you. But we want to pray for you. And if you feel like you need that and you're not in a community group, but you don't want to jump into a group, but you want someone to pray for you, we would love to pray for you. So please don't ever hesitate to reach out for prayer or for help.
It's a great word, great reminder. So I think maybe as we kind of wrap up the question, the other question, I think the practical question on a lot of people's minds is, okay, when might groups be able to begin gathering in person again, right? Like is this okay, we'll put up with this for another week or two, and then we'll kind of see where we're at. Like, I think the questions out there a lot. When are we going to be able to kind of shift back? And do we as pastors have any idea about that?
No. I mean, obviously, we have to follow the state and local laws that are kind of guiding us, and we want to make sure that we're being safe and listening to experts. I would imagine as time goes on, they might be allowing groups under a certain number to gather together. If there's expanded testing and those kinds of things, there's a lot of things we don't know, of course, and everyone feels that the pressure of what we don't know. But as certain things maybe open up, if there's ways to, one of the things I was thinking of is if you have a small group, and there's ways to do a guys hangout with social distancing when the orders have been relaxed at some point in the next few weeks. that is a good opportunity to do that if you're in a driveway or you're in a space that you can be 6 feet apart, or you're just your group is small enough that you don't have maybe that many guys or ladies or whatever to be able to be in person. That is probably the first thing that will come. Your community group probably is going to be a while because you have like over 50 people or 100 people in your community group, because it's just a hugest group in the world.
When you count all the kids.
Yeah. But those they count as people,
and they're great. But they're great at staying 6 feet apart.
Yeah, the kids are really good at that. That's a good point.
Super easy.
Yeah. So I would imagine, actually, that's a good point that, for any of their groups, and a lot of our groups have a mixture of kids and singles or marrieds or whoever, people without kids. But I would imagine that you have probably guys' nights in person and ladies' nights in person before you have a whole group meeting again for a while.
Yeah, and I think it's part of why I asked the question, not because I think there's an answer, but I think the reality is social distancing isn't going anywhere anytime soon. And so the reason I want us to recognize that and say it out loud is because we would encourage you to not just sit and like try to wait this out until you can get back to community group the way it was before. Right? Like, now is a time for us to engage and figure out what the new normal for each one of our groups is, what the new kind of foreseeable future, how we can love one another for the foreseeable future, structurally in what that looks like, and instead of just kind of like holding on and waiting out, because I think we're not proactively loving each other well that way. And I would also say, just in closing, I've heard a lot of encouragement kind of in the larger Christian world, and even just in our church, just people encouraging one another to thank and encourage their pastors, because pastors are doing a lot of just hard work and trying to figure things out. And we super appreciate that. I think we hear that. I think we feel super encouraged. I would also just really encourage you to thank and encourage and serve your community group leaders. These are people that are not on the church payroll, whose own lives have been like upended, and they're trying to figure out how to live and work and navigate this season on their own. And they're like proactively trying to think through how to love you well, how to care for you well, how to structure things, and they don't have any idea either, like the rest of us. And so I would just encourage you to both thank them, to serve them, to whatever, to support them in that, to step in and care for others. Don't just leave it all kind of to them, like, the community group leader is gonna take care of it. I think there's just a whole host of ways you can come along and be an encouragement to them, because all of our community group leaders are just incredible servants. They've been incredible servants all along, sacrificing in all sorts of ways. And through this season, they're a significantly unseen part of the church family and the church structure that have been doing a lot to serve and to care for and to facilitate the caring for the body of Christ here at Cornerstone. So, and if you're a community group leader, we just want you to know how thankful we are for you, for what you're doing. And if there is anything we can do to support you, any questions you have, you know who your DMT leaders are, who your group of community group leaders are. There's too many leaders there. Anyways. Talk to one of your pastors. We're in contact with you regularly anyways, and we'd love to serve you however we can. Landed that one with a little bump, like a good experienced pilot, just kind of coming in nice and smooth, and then go boom.
You gotta wake everybody up.
But hey, we're safely here on the ground. And with that, everybody's happy. The seatbelt light's about to turn up. We shouldn't talk about flying anytime soon. I can't even getting on a plane. Some of you are getting on planes. I don't know. All right. With that, it's been a long day.
It's been real, everybody. It has been real.
Thanks for joining us. We love you and we miss you, and we'll see you virtually Sunday or before. Have a great week.